session can begin. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining in the second stakeholder consultation with regards to the development of the inclusive carbon standard. This is an outline of the agenda that we'll be following in this presentation. And for some of you who participated in the first stakeholder consultation, it may seem a little bit repetitive, but we'd like to highlight areas where there are new developments, and also just to go back and just go over the principles, the structure, the governance, the project cycle, and accredited auditors that do make up the inclusive carbon standard, or the ICS. By way of introduction, you may know that the inclusive carbon standard has been in development for about the last 2 to 3 years, principally championed by Food and Trees for Africa, and also in partnership with Prometheum Carbon. The real driver behind the development of the standard is the growing local and international need for increased climate action. I think the news is pretty bleak these days, with reports of where we are in terms of unprecedented global warming and the impacts that these are having and will have on society and the environment. I think the South African government has taken heed in many respects and has developed a suite of climate mitigation measures to reduce climate change impacts and protect society at large. One of these is the South African carbon tax, which was implemented in mid-2019, and under which the inclusive carbon standard aims to provide offset credits. Another important driver behind the development of the standard is the growing demand by corporates to set net zero or net neutral targets in a specified time frame. And these net zero targets are only possible through with the use of carbon offsets, because some emissions cannot be mitigated and then they will need to be offset in some way. One of the unique aspects of the standard is that our intention is to reduce the very high costs and efforts that are traditionally involved in registering and verifying carbon offsets under the well-established standards. These are some of the ICS principles that are used in the development of the standard and also for the ongoing operations of the standard. Many of these principles work in tandem with each other, and many serve as quality checks to balance out the various principles. For example, as I was saying, one of the main aims is to reduce the costs associated with registering offset projects and offset credits. And one of the ways that the ICS intends to do this is through the use of technology and various other components. But in no way can the goal of reducing costs have a negative impact on the environmental, social, or economic integrity of the offsets that come out of the system. Any offset that comes out must be real, measurable, permanent, additional, independently verified, and unique. And I think that this principle lends itself and works well with best practice internationally. The ICS's governance structures are transparent. We make use of independent auditors, and we champion no net harm principles. So we have got to avoid environmental or social harm. And this is also espoused by the various markets in which we see the ICS credits playing a role, particularly the South African carbon tax and other international markets. All of these principles are all bound together by an independent auditing process. And we believe strongly that the auditing requirements for carbon offsets should be the equivalent to, or well balanced with, the auditing requirements for the type of entities who develop greenhouse gas inventories, for example, against which these offsets need to be used. I'll speak to these principles in the next few slides as well. First of all, we must have a discussion on the principles for adoption. The standard is in development at the moment, and it is being developed according to various international best practices and standards. There have been a lot of lessons learned from the well-established standards in the South African market, namely the CDM and VCS being the two dominant standards. And those have been applied in the development of the standard as well. There's a list here of various entities that are also developing carbon offset principles and criteria to evaluate what constitutes a quality offset. And this is by no means a comprehensive list, but it does give you an idea of the work that's taking place in this sector. And I think that the new recent additions here since our last consultation is the SBTI, which is developing a net zero standard, which should hopefully be published later this year. And that discusses compensation and neutralization offset credits, which is becoming a well-known terminology in the sectors, as well as the Task Force on Scaling Voluntary Carbon Markets has developed a set of core carbon principles, which we are basing the standard upon as well. In terms of adoption, we are hoping that South Africa's Department of Mineral Resources and Energy will soon release the framework and assessment criteria that they've developed in order to assess local standards. And we hope that perhaps this will be early next year or late this year. And we hope that at the same time, there will be requests for eligible standards to apply for approval with the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. And approval will allow offsets generated under that standard to be used under the South African carbon tax. We would also need an adoption process by various corporates who may wish to use the offsets generated under this standard to develop offset projects that may be inside of or outside of their value chains. For instance, you might have a multinational that sets a net zero target, and the offsets that could be developed under this standard could be used to assist that corporate meet their net zero or net neutral targets. We'd also very much like to investigate rolling out the standard to other developing countries. Just to recap a little bit for those who are not acquainted with some of the new components in the standard that we believe will achieve various cost and efficiency savings. The use of component methodologies is a key new development in our opinion. And component methodologies differ slightly from your traditional methodologies that you might find in other standards, in that they are broken down into the different components that usually make up one large standard. By breaking them up, you can make sure that they are specific or well-tailored to your project requirements. And we've got a list of component methodology categories. You can see them: project details, additionality, baseline, and new since our last consultation are the component methodologies for permanence related to forestry types and land-based projects, as well as the tagging for markets and co-benefits. And the tagging, for instance, for a market could be a South African carbon tax market. You could also tag your offset as according to a certain co-benefit. Perhaps your project has a gender empowerment co-benefit, or maybe it's a co-benefit very specific to a corporate that the offset can be used within that corporate's to meet that corporate's target to go net neutral or net zero. We are also looking at royalty fees for developers of component methodologies, because the idea is that there may take some time and effort to develop the initial component methodologies, but these should be made available to subsequent project developers. And those entities that take the time and the risk to develop these component methodologies should be compensated in some way. Two other key different aspects in terms of the ICS that would differentiate the ICS from other standards are the use of landmark projects and landmark values. And these two terms are based on the legal precedent principle, which is to say that, for instance, if a certain project with a certain suite of component methodologies is successfully validated by an auditor and approved by the standard, project developers who then wish to develop a subsequent project that is very similar in nature should be able to benefit from the fact that a project that is so similar to theirs has already been registered and successfully uploaded onto the system. Similarly, a landmark value is a value that has been validated in a project and approved by the ICS as well. For example, a grid emission factor or a baseline factor or a permanence or a penetration rate of particular technologies, these could all be landmark values. And the principle applies is that if they have been approved, if they have been audited, they should be available for use in subsequent projects without going through the same onerous validation process that we see in the traditional standard frameworks. The landmark values must, however, be specified in the relevant component methodologies. And finally, one of the other aspects that we believe will result in efficiency and cost savings is the use of technology, particularly the use of smart meters, which can be connected to the Internet of Things, cloud-based storage systems, and in a subsequent phase, we hope to anchor a distributed ledger technology aspect to the IT platform that's already in place. This slide shows an overall structure of the ICS, and what's new in this slide compared to the slide that was presented at the first workshop is that we are looking at increasing the geographical scope, so not limiting it to South Africa. And then we've got the two new component methodology tags, which are methodology components, which are permanence and tagging. And just a reiteration that the types of projects that can be included on the ICS are obviously climate mitigation projects that involve either emission removals or emission reductions. Projects that are eligible under the ICS must meet all of the eligibility rules of the standard, as well as the applicability criteria of the various component methodologies. This slide gives an overview of the ICS project cycle. And for project developers or people involved in offset projects, you'll see a high degree of similarity with the typical processes used by other standards. There are some differences, and one of the main ones being that the method of developing projects and project reports, whether they are verification reports or monitoring reports, is that the actions are principally undertaken on the IT platform that the ICS has developed. So the first thing you would need to do is to register on the platform as a user. Once you've registered and you provide some details, like your name and company name and project name, etc., then you can select the appropriate component methodologies that are best suited to your project. If one of the component methodologies that you would like to use is not available, then you can propose a new methodology as well. The next step would be to upload your project onto the IT platform. And what happens is that on selection of the respective component methodologies, the template is automatically generated based on the requirements of those component methodologies. So you have a list of questions that automatically pop up, and then you need to input information or data into those fields to complete the project form. If in your project activity you have a smart meter that's connected to the Internet of Things, you will need to specify the IP address or addresses of those devices. Once that is complete, you can then go on to the validation step, which needs to be undertaken by an accredited auditor. And in this respect, we hope that there'll be many expedited projects due to the landmark project and value principles. And once the audit is complete, the public will have an opportunity to comment on the audit of the project registration. Once that process is complete, and perhaps if there are no comments, or if there are comments, then comments need to be managed accordingly and responded to. That's when the project can be successfully registered on the system. Thereafter, data is either automatically entered into the platform if you've got a smart meter connected to the Internet of Things, or it can be manually uploaded, like in spreadsheets, like the current way of doing things. The monitoring report then, which also has fields that are automatically generated by the system, is then completed, and you can specify your start and your end dates of the monitoring period. And then that gets audited by an accredited auditor. Once that's complete, the public can then have an opportunity to comment on that audit before those credits are successfully issued by the ICS standard. A note on the auditors. Any auditor that is eligible under the ICS will need to provide evidence that they are accredited by the IAF, the International Accreditation Forum, or a national standards body like SANUS in South Africa. And they need to be accredited in terms of ISO 14065 or the national equivalent. Auditors will also need to register on the system, and they'll need to undergo training to use the ICS IT platform. And that's essentially a recap of where we have been. And where we are now is that I'm happy to tell you that we've finished a first draft of the ICS standard document, and it will be made available for public comment. We have also completed the first draft of the IT platform, and we've undertaken internal testing. So next steps, we need to develop the governance structures further. We need beta testing on the IT platform, which will entail the development and uploading of component methodologies and pilot projects, i.e. projects that are actually real, not test projects. And our aim is to build capacity in the standard in these various steps. A few words on the governance structures. Much work has been completed with regards to the development of theoretical frameworks and supporting documentation, and an idea of the types and capacities of people needed to fill these roles. But these need to be fine-tuned and finalized. So we are calling for the staffing of governance structures, particularly in the Environmental Integrity Committee, in the technical subcommittee as well. And we will be able to publish the list of skills and competencies required for these positions as well. Participation would be on a pro bono basis at this point, while we are still sorting out approvals and adoptions of the standard by the various entities that require approval. We also need to go further with the beta testing of the IT platform. We need independent third-party critics and developers to help us fine-tune the IT system as well. And as a next stage, we are also looking to undertake work with regards to the anchoring of the distributed ledger component to the ICS platform. So we're calling for volunteers to test projects and carbon offset lifecycle processes. We need tests on the system functionality and the user experience. We're calling for auditors to register on the system and evaluate pilot projects pro bono at this stage. And we're also looking for companies to develop component methodologies and pilot real projects. Note here that these projects obviously can't earn any monetized offsets until they're approved by the various bodies that we're looking for approval from. And these include the DMRE and other corporate entities or programs. And we are definitely looking for further funding to develop the distributed ledger anchoring and update and refine the user manual.